There are cities in the United States people talk about constantly. New York, Chicago, Miami, Austin even. It's like every third person with a podcast thinks moving to one of these cities counts as a flex or a sort of I'm in the know and you're a peasant type thing. And then of course, there's Cincinnati. Most people know almost nothing about Cincinnati, and somehow they're very confident about it. They know it's in Ohio, they know it's got a football team, and some of them even know about the chili, which honestly sounds like a prank to me. But what most people don't know is that Cincinnati was once one of the most important cities in the United States. Not regionally important, not pretty good for Ohio, important, but actually nationally important. It was once the sixth largest city in the United States, a major center for commerce, culture, abolitionist activity, and frontier expansion. For a while, this place was one of the beating hearts of the U.S. And then, one day, America just sort of shrugged and wandered off. That's what makes Cincinnati interesting. This isn't a story of some city that exploded overnight and then became trendy because a few developers slapped string lights on an old warehouse district. Cincinnati had real weight, real history, real influence. It helped build the American interior, then it got bypassed, overshadowed, and quietly shoved into the background while flashier cities got the documentaries and the magazine covers. So today we're doing a real deep dive into Cincinnati, Ohio, how it became America's first inland boomtown, how it lost its crown, what went wrong, what's going right, and whether this city is actually one of the most underrated places in the country right now, because it just might be. And stick around, because later in the video we're getting into one of the strangest urban comeback stories in the Midwest. Plus, the real answer to whether Cincinnati is a good place to live today, or it's just another city with a nice skyline and a lot of denial. Let's take a look. Cincinnati gets its start in 1788, which already puts it ahead of what most people assume. This wasn't some late industrial city that showed up because railroads needed a pit stop or something. Three men, Matthias Denman, Robert Patterson, and Israel Ludlow, came off a float boat and founded the settlement on the north bank of the Ohio River. They originally called it Lostatenville, which sounds less like a city and more like a pill your doctor gives you to lower your blood pressure. In 1790, Governor Arthur St. Clair renamed Cincinnati after the Society of Cincinnati, which itself is named after a Roman citizen soldier, Cincinnatus. Even at the beginning, this place had the energy of someone trying very hard to sound very important. But the real story here wasn't the name, it was the map. Cincinnati sat in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. It was on the Ohio River in the late 1700s and early 1800s. Rivers were the highways of America back then. The river's location made Cincinnati a critical gateway between the east and the western frontier. Fort Washington was built in 1789 and became a major military outpost for the entire Northwest Territory. Soldiers needed food, equipment, and supplies. Settlers heading west needed the same stuff. Cincinnati was right in the middle of that flow. It was one of those rare places where geography did half the work. Now this kills me. In 1800, Cincinnati had around 750 people. To say they grew after that is an understatement. By 1820, they had nearly 10,000 people. That is absurd growth for the time. That's not a steady progress. That is the frontier on rocket fuel with a side of caffeine. It was the first great inland boomtown in the country. It wasn't Chicago, it wasn't St. Louis, it was Cincinnati, Ohio. And that part gets forgotten because Chicago eventually took the spotlight and then acted like they invented the Midwest and corruption. Now this is the part where the city really starts flexing on people. By the 1820s and 1830s, Cincinnati was thriving in a way no city west of the Appalachians had before. The Miami and Erie Canal, completed in 1828, linked Cincinnati with the Great Lakes and expanded its reach across the growing country. Suddenly, it wasn't just a river city, it was a trade hub connecting inland America. Farmers shipped crops in, goods shipped out, commerce exploded. The city became one of the most important nodes in the movement of people, products, and money across the interior of the United States. Honestly, at this point, if you don't live in this part of the country, you're thinking, I never thought Cincinnati was this important. It was. And then there were the pigs. Cincinnati became the #1 pork processing center in America. In 1840 alone, it packed about $3 million worth of pork annually, which was a huge number for the time. I'll save you the trouble of Googling it. That's about 112 million today. That earned Cincinnati the nickname Porcopolis. Now today, Porcopolis sounds like a county fair attraction that definitely smells terrible, or like bacon, then it smells wonderful. But back then, it meant power. Being the pork king of America in the 1800s was not some weird side note. It was industrial dominance with bacon attached. By 1850, Cincinnati had 115,000 people, and it was the sixth largest city in the entire United States. Larger than Chicago at that point, larger than a bunch of other places people now assume were always more important. For a while, Cincinnati really was the Queen City of the West. And yes, that's one of its old nicknames, besides Porcopolis. It was also called Paris of America for some reason. This town had range. Weird range, but it had range. And this is where Cincinnati gets more interesting than people expect, because it wasn't just a business machine, it was building culture too. In 1843, Cincinnati built the first public observatory in the Western Hemisphere. The whole Western Hemisphere. In 1850, it opened the first Jewish hospital in the United States. In 1853, it created the first fully paid municipal fire department in the country. Mark Twain worked there as a young man. Thomas Edison did too. And when the Prince of Wales showed up in 1860, he was so impressed with the city, he ordered photographs be taken of Cincinnati. Now, back in the day, that was a big deal. You just didn't walk outside with your cell phone and start taking pictures. So that's not a profile of some random Ohio river town. That is the profile of a place with national and even international stature. Now, one of the biggest forces to shape this city, it was German immigration. By 1870, about 23% of Cincinnati's roughly 200,000 residents were German-born, and they didn't just arrive and quietly blend in. They built neighborhoods, institutions, breweries, music venues, churches, and a whole civic culture that still defines Cincinnati today. The most famous example of this is the neighborhood called Over-the-Rhine. That name came from a canal that reminded German immigrants of the Rhine River back in Europe. That area has turned into one of the most dense and architecturally rich urban neighborhoods in the country. It's really close to downtown. It's a nice neighborhood. You got beer halls, theaters, apartment buildings, gathering spaces, all of it. This is a huge part of why Cincinnati started getting called the Paris of America, which, to be clear, is a much easier nickname than Porcopolis, even if both are technically on Cincinnati's resume. You know how every website you've ever visited somehow remembers you better than your own relatives? That's not nostalgia. That's data brokers selling your information to anyone that wants it. Your phone number, sensitive information, your relatives, even the apartment you rented in college, it's all out there. Google your name and buckle up. And no, deleting your social media won't magically fix it. I've tried. The internet just ignored me and kept doing what the internet does. That's where Aura comes in. Aura is an identity theft protection service that does all the internet digging for you. They find where the information's been leaked, they delete it for you. Plus, they monitor your credit, they keep tabs on data breaches, and even alert you if someone has your phone number and they're passing it around to robocallers. Over the years, I've tried a bunch of different identity theft protection services, but they were all scattered across different apps and websites. Aura keeps it simple. Everything in one place. You can manage what they track, how they notify you, and what info you want locked down. You even get alerts if your information is on the dark web. Real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking. 24/7 monitoring of your identity so you don't have to. Plus a VPN, antivirus, password manager, all in one place instead of across 15 apps you forget to renew. And if something actually goes wrong, you get US-based support and up to $5 million in identity theft insurance with fraud specialists who help you fix it. You could try Aura for free for 14 days at aura.com/Briggs. During those 2 weeks, it already starts scrubbing your information from those data broker sites. I'm not leaving myself vulnerable, and you shouldn't either. Try Aura. And here's another interesting fact. Cincinnati also mattered in the biggest moral battle of the era. Because it sat right across the river from Kentucky, a slave state, Cincinnati became an important station for the Underground Railroad. Levi Coffin, often called the president of the Underground Railroad, operated there. He was an interesting dude. He was born in North Carolina, but his family became disgusted with the slavery and they headed to Indiana. Eventually, he moved to Cincinnati. He was an American Quaker, an abolitionist, farmer, businessman, and humanitarian. He's buried there still at the Spring Grove Cemetery in an unmarked grave. During the Civil War, Cincinnati also helped supply the Union Army. So this wasn't just a city making money and big buildings, It was one of the places where the country's future was being fought over commerce, politics, and human lives. That mattered a lot, especially back in the day. Now, at this point in a story, Cincinnati looks pretty unstoppable, and that's usually where history gets cruel. Because cities don't just need success, they need the right kind of success for the next era. Cincinnati's rise had been built on water. The river mattered, the canal mattered. But once the railroad age took over, those advantages started fading fast. The city that had been perfectly positioned for one century suddenly looked less perfect for the next one. And while Cincinnati was adjusting, Chicago came roaring in like a guy who showed up late for the game and somehow gets all the credit for the win. Chicago had in the 1870s what Cincinnati had in the early 1800s: explosive growth, geographic advantage for the new transportation era, and a sense that the future was arriving there instead of somewhere else. Then the Great Chicago Fire hit in 1871. Sounds like a disaster, and it was, but it also gave Chicago something Cincinnati never got: a forced modernization. Chicago rebuilt bigger, newer, and faster. By 1890, it had 1 million people. Cincinnati couldn't keep up, and that momentum didn't stop, it just couldn't keep up with Chicago. And that kind of decline is almost harder, because dramatic crashes get remembered. Slow irrelevance doesn't. Cincinnati's golden age didn't end with a single spectacular disaster. It got outcompeted, then outgrown, then overlooked. It stayed alive, it kept functioning, it kept producing things, employing people, and building neighborhoods. But it stopped feeling like a main character in our national story. It became one of those places the country benefits from without really thinking about it, which is very Midwestern fate, if we're being honest. I mean, most people never realize how important these Midwestern states are. Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, all the food they produce. I mean, all of them do, but those play a big part in the diet of the American people. That's kind of what Cincinnati turned into, just a place that does things for the country, but nobody really thought about it. The 20th century piled on. Like a lot of American cities, Cincinnati got hit by suburbanization, white flight, and highway construction. The middle class moved outward. Interstate 71 and 75 tore through neighborhoods, especially black neighborhoods, on the east and on the west side of Over-the-Rhine, displacing communities and leaving scars that are still visible to this day. This wasn't just local bad luck. That was America's favorite urban planning trick for a few decades. Bulldoze living neighborhoods, call it progress, and act surprised when the social fabric shreds to pieces. And Cincinnati followed that script right along with the rest of the country's big cities. Cincinnati was definitely going through some changes. The city itself peaked at a population of about 503 people in 1950. After that, the population decline was steady. By 2000, Cincinnati had lost more than 40% of the peak. And if you don't know, that's a big hit. By 2000, the population had dropped all the way down to 331,000 residents. 2010, they lost another 10.4% of their population. And finally, in 2020, they gained some population, 4.2%. But while they were losing population, they were going through the same struggles that a lot of Rust Belt cities were going through. Hollowed out neighborhoods, weakened tax base, and a sense that the city's best days were far behind it. And then came the darkest chapter in modern Cincinnati history. By 2001, Over-the-Rhine had become one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the country. The same year, a police shooting sparked the Cincinnati riots, one of the most serious urban uprisings in American history. The images went national, as you can imagine. When most Americans saw these riots and these images, they didn't think about the complicated history, the disinvestment, the racial tensions, the urban restructuring. All they thought was, yep, there's another crappy Ohio town. And once a place gets shoved into that box, it takes forever to get them out of it. So by now you're wondering, is there a better part of this story? Does Cincinnati ever recover? What's Cincinnati like right now? That's what most people are wondering. What's Cincinnati like right now? Is it still a relic with some nice old buildings, or has it actually become one of the more compelling places in the Midwest? And I gotta tell you, this is where Cincinnati starts surprising a lot of people again. The symbol of the comeback is that neighborhood Over-the-Rhine. If you told people in the early 2000s that Over-the-Rhine would one day be one of the most sought-after urban neighborhoods in the Midwest, they would literally laugh in your face. Same thing if I tried to tell you Compton, California is going to be the greatest city in all of Los Angeles someday. You should laugh in my face. It'll never happen. Your next question is probably, have you ever been to Over-the-Rhine? I have, about 5 years ago. It was a nice neighborhood. The homes around this place, Washington Park, it's a park in Over-the-Rhine. The homes around there, they're breathtaking. One of those things where you look at them, you go, you know what? I'm going to start talking to real estate agents around here. But the transformation has been real. Over-the-Rhine has the largest collection of intact Italianate architecture in the United States, which is one of those facts that people hear and then they immediately want to verify it because it sounds too fancy for a place they associate with chili and football. I used to associate it with the Reds' old owner, Marge Schott. Woo, she was a handful. Look her up on after this video. She was a mess. But the Italianate architecture is true and it matters. Those architectural bones gave the neighborhood the foundation most cities can only dream about. A huge part of the revival came through the 3CDC, the Cincinnati Center City Development Corporation. That's a non-profit that has driven more than $2 billion of investment into downtown and the Over-the-Rhine neighborhood since 2004. That's the kind of money that changes things. Historic buildings got restored, streets got activated, businesses came in. The number of restaurants and bars in Over-the-Rhine went from a handful to more than 100 in about 15 years. They got a brewery called Rheingeist. I didn't visit when I was there, but it is in a restored 1895 bottling plant, and it became one of the most visited breweries in the country. In other words, the neighborhood stopped being a cautionary tale and started becoming a destination, and probably the best neighborhood Cincinnati has. Now, of course, every comeback has a price tag and a fight attached to it. Revival sounds great until you ask who gets to stay for it. Like a lot of redevelopment stories, Cincinnati's comeback raised real questions about displacement, affordability, and whether longtime residents actually benefited when the neighborhood became hot again. That tension is part of the story too, and pretending otherwise would just be lazy. I could just tell you all the nice, wonderful things about Cincinnati and the Over-the-Rhine development and leave it at that. People got displaced. It became unaffordable for the old residents. Even with all that considered, the physical and economic turnaround for Over-the-Rhine is hard to deny. It's one of the clearest examples in the Midwest of a neighborhood going from near collapse to major demand. And Over-the-Rhine's not the only thing Cincinnati has going for it. One of the city's biggest strengths today is its neighborhood variety. Hyde Park is tree-lined, polished, and loaded with historic homes. It's kind of one of those places where families and established professionals tend to end up if they want charm with fewer headaches. Mount Adams gives you hilltop views of the Ohio River and one of the more distinctive settings in the metro. Oakley has become the emerging neighborhood, popular with younger buyers and people who want something energetic without going full luxury on them. These neighborhoods give Cincinnati something more, like a little more depth outsiders usually don't expect. It doesn't feel like one neighborhood downtown is trying to fake the whole city. They're actually moving forward. They're getting better, and their population growth is shown. From 2010 to 2020, the population rose by 4.2%, and since 2020, it's already risen 2%. Then, of course, there's the stuff people like to joke about until they actually visit. Cincinnati's food scene is more serious than the stereotype. Yes, we need to talk about their chili. Cincinnati chili is its own weird local religion. Outsiders hear the word chili and expect something smoky and southwestern. What they get is spaghetti, spiced meat sauce, and enough shredded cheese to insulate a small shed. Some people love it. Other people react like they personally insulted the entire Italian population of the United States. Either way, it's memorable, which already makes it more interesting than most regional foods. And beyond the chili, the city has deep roots in beer culture because of its German heritage, plus a restaurant scene that's gotten much stronger as the city's been revived. Culturally, Cincinnati has a lot more weight than people give it credit for. They've got music venues, old symphonies, museums, all the things a typical major city should have. But theirs are pretty good. Sports help too. The Reds is one of the oldest baseball franchises. The Bengals have dragged Cincinnati back into the national conversation in recent years, and that kind of visibility matters to people more than they realize. Sports doesn't just entertain, they reshape the way outsiders picture a place. A city that people once wrote off as old and irrelevant suddenly starts looking younger, louder, and more alive when it's on national television in January. That image boost is real. Now let's talk about the numbers of Cincinnati. Cincinnati Metro has about 2.3 million people, with the city itself having about 317,000 currently. That's an estimate. They don't give the exact numbers till the next census, but that's the estimate. So the population has stabilized after decades of decline. That stabilization matters. It suggests the city is no longer just bleeding population and hoping nobody notices. It suggests some neighborhoods and some parts of the city have found real footing again. And the biggest selling point for a lot of normal people is housing. The median home price in Cincinnati is around $276,000. Now, I'm one of those people that like to go by the average home value because that's more realistic, in my opinion. That's currently around $244,000. In a country where buying a home increasingly feels like a game designed by sadists, Cincinnati still offers a legitimate path to homeownership for regular people. And if you've been watching this channel long enough, you know that's becoming less and less of a thing these days. I moved to the Portland metro area to get away from LA prices and a few other reasons back in 2010. In my suburb, the average home value back then was about $200,000. Right now, it's $524,000. And that's how it is all across the country. Cincinnati's had a drastic climb as well, but not nearly as bad since 2010. In 2010, Cincinnati's average home value was about $125,000. So it's always been affordable, and it's staying that way. It hasn't climbed nearly as bad as a lot of other major cities. Let's talk about their economy. The economy here is stronger than a lot of people assume. Cincinnati ranks as the 28th largest economy in the US and the 5th largest in the Midwest, which is pretty solid for a city that most people have forgotten about. 3 Fortune 500 headquarters are based there, Procter & Gamble and Fifth Third Bank. Those aren't tiny companies hanging on for dear life. These are major employers with national reach. Add in strengths in healthcare, education, finance, consumer goods, manufacturing, and emerging tech, and you get a metro that's more economically balanced than a lot of old industrial cities. The employment rate here sits around 4.4%, with modest job growth between 23 and 24. And local universities awarded 17,000 degrees in 2024 alone, which helps keep the talent pipeline. And that part's important because too many people still imagine Cincinnati as a city of nostalgia and old brick buildings. It isn't. It has active employers, real sectors, and a metro economy that's strong enough to keep it from becoming a one-industry hostage situation. That doesn't mean it's booming like some Sunbelt darling with 900 apartment complexes under construction. It does mean Cincinnati has more stability than a lot of places people spend way more time talking about. All right, it's time to turn the page and take a look at the crime and see where that sits in modern-day Cincinnati. This is where people get weird online. Some folks want to pretend that every city is basically a war zone. Other people act like mentioning crime is some kind of hate crime against urbanism or some kind of racial minority. The crime is the crime. The numbers are the numbers. Who's committing it? That's a story I don't get into. I just talk about the crime and the numbers. According to the FBI, Cincinnati's overall crime rate is about 4,675 incidents for every 100,000 residents. That's above the national average of roughly 2,119. Violent crime is about 836 for every 100,000 residents, where the national average is about 359 for every 100,000. Which puts them around double the national average. Not apocalyptic, but not wonderful. Long-term violent crime is almost down 10% since pre-pandemic levels. And most importantly, crime is heavily concentrated in specific neighborhoods. North Cincinnati and many suburbs are significantly safer than the citywide average. And that matters because is Cincinnati safe, or any city, is one of those questions people Google when they're researching any place in the United States. The answer for Cincinnati is it's not great, but you could do much worse. Like all cities, it really depends on where you are, what your lifestyle is, and whether you did 10 minutes of research before picking a neighborhood. That's true in most metros, but it's especially true here. Cincinnati is not a city where you should blindly move into the cheapest place you could find and assume that it'll all work out. Then again, that rule applies to half the country now, so welcome to modern America, everyone. All that being said, who is Cincinnati actually good for? If you're the first-time home buyer priced out of trendier metros, Cincinnati makes a lot of sense. If you're a family that wants a real metro area without getting financially mugged every month, Cincinnati makes even more sense. If you like architecture, sports, old neighborhoods, river views, and a city with actual identity instead of one assembled in a lab or by real estate marketeers, Cincinnati makes even more sense for you. If you want Miami weather, Denver hiking, Austin hype, and zero crime for under $300,000, then you're looking for a unicorn and you should maybe calm that down and be realistic. Cincinnati's biggest advantage may be that it still feels like a real city. It has scars, it has contradictions, it has wealth and struggles right next to each other, it has glorious old buildings and neighborhoods that still need help. It has a comeback story, but not the kind that magically fixes everything. It has civic pride, but it's the kind with a chip on its shoulder, not the kind where everyone becomes unbearable at brunch. Cincinnati feels like a place that knows it deserves more respect, but stopped begging for it a long time ago. And maybe that's why it's getting interesting again. Because the city never really disappeared, it just got quieter. While other places were busy rebranding themselves every 6 months, Cincinnati kept rebuilding, one block, one neighborhood at a time. It restored old buildings, it held on to major employers, it kept enough affordability to stay in the conversation for normal people. And now in a country where the cost of living is strangling more and more people, Cincinnati's starting to look like one of those places that might have been right in front of all of us the whole time. So here's the verdict. Cincinnati is not the most glamorous city in America. It's not the trendiest. It's not the loudest. It's not trying to seduce you with palm trees, startup jargon, or influencers pretending a converted warehouse is a spiritual experience. What it is one of the most underrated metros in the country. Cincinnati's not selling you a fantasy. It's offering you something more useful. A city for regular people with substance. And honestly, in 2026, that's worth a lot. Because the city that once helped build America never actually stopped mattering, it just got lost in the shuffle. That's Cincinnati, Ohio for you. I would love to hear what you think about Cincinnati. Have you ever visited? Have you ever lived there? Do you live there now? Do you think people should be moving to Cincinnati right now? Let me know in the comment section. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.